Good evening, everybody. How you doing? This is Wes Cable, not calling, but from the Obsessed with Wine podcast. It's Friday night, which means we've got another interview for you. And tonight, I'm especially excited about tonight's interview. I think it's going to be very educational, not only for me, but for you. I think we're going to learn a lot. So let's just jump right into it. So today, we've got a special guest. This is Luke Trainum. He's from the Hazy Mountain Vineyards winery out in Virginia. And, I've said this to him a minute ago, but I live here in California. I know nothing about Virginia wine, but I've heard some things about it. So I'm really curious to see. So let's get him in and see what's going on out there. Luke, good evening. How are you?
Good. How are you doing, Wes?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm super excited. I know you just heard me say that, but um, you know, I I feel like I have some knowledge of wine, right? But I know nothing about Virginia wine. So I'm hoping that you can help everybody here and educate us on, what you guys are doing out there and talk about some of your wines.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. I love talking about it.
So let's talk about just the Virginia wine country, just to start off. Okay. So I saw the facility that you guys have on the website. It looks like a beautiful place. You guys do weddings there and events and all kinds of cool stuff there. Besides the wine, obviously. But tell us a little bit for those who don't know, like myself. What is the wine country like in Virginia, and why is it that I've never seen any wines on the shelf here in California from Virginia? So maybe you could talk about that first.
Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of to start off, a lot of the wineries in Virginia, are a much smaller scale in contrast to California wineries. So, when I started out in California, when I came to Virginia, I was talking to a lot of wineries, and a large winery in Virginia is 25,000 cases in production, which for California, that's a boutique family winery. It's nothing much. There are wineries that I went into in Virginia that their production are 4 or 5 thousand cases a year. And I was looking for a job. I was like, oh, the owner just must make this like himself. So you guys probably
Yeah,
don't need anyone. So
yeah.
that's part of it. Is it's a lot of smaller estates with smaller production that really get all of their traffic for agritourism. So just people coming through the area and they're popping in and they're just buying bottles and have them in the tasting room. And so a lot of off-site sales don't happen for Virginia wine. They're not distributed widely, even within the state. And then outside the state, they're essentially not distributed at all. There's a few brands that distribute outside the state, but I believe the statistic is 98% of Virginia wines consumed inside the state and only
Wow.
2% leaves. So that's one reason you don't hear anything about it because we're just drinking it all.
Yeah, right.
But
So, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, as far as the regions go, that kind of plays into it as well because Virginia's got kind of five distinct regions and areas. They're mostly broken up kind of by main geographical areas. They're not as finely broken down into AVAs as you have in California, which is something I'm kind of personally working on as a project, getting some specific areas carved out. But you've got we have two vineyard sites. One is in or each are in separate AVAs. One is the Shenandoah Valley, which if you're looking at Virginia on a map and you're looking on a topo map, that left side where you see a huge valley running across, that's Shenandoah Valley. So it's about 150 miles long. At its widest point, it's 26 miles wide. That's got a very distinct kind of terroir there for just the environment itself, for everything. Not just wine. It's got a valley cooling effect with a huge diurnal temperature flux. The Shenandoah Valley's soil profile, it's just all the eroded limestone from the mountains. So you're at like a higher elevation for our area. So valley floor is around 1,200 feet up where our vineyard site's at. It's about 1,700 feet elevation. It's what you'll see for that valley. And it's all kind of limestone silt loam, and then you hop over into central Virginia, so kind of right in the heart of it. That is kind of where UVA is, University of Virginia, where Thomas Jefferson has Monticello, which dominates every conversation about Virginia wine ever. If you look at any
Yeah.
article written on Virginia wine, I promise you it starts off with in 17 dot 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 Thomas
Yeah.
Jefferson planted 8 vines at Monticello. You're like, God, he
Hmm.
failed. Let's move on.
Yeah.
So but that's where Monticello is. So that's the Monticello AVA. That is geographically a lot more foothills and kind of it's a Piedmont, and so it's a lot more decomposing granite up in the mountains, and then the floor area and kind of lower valley areas all clay. But that is where a higher concentration of wealth and kind of your typical wine drinking culture is. So you see that also in the Northern Virginia area. There's an area outside DC called Loudoun County that has a high concentration of Virginia wineries. It's a similar thing. It's like kind of old school aristocratic horse country.
Mm.
So you always see, like in Virginia, you'll see a lot of wineries that look like horse barns and like kind of classic that style. So that kind of is one theme that dominates within Virginia wine is this kind of old school, kind of English-esque horse country thing.
Mm.
And that's all vineyards on heavy clay soils, kind of on valley floors. And now with this kind of next generation, I'd say we're probably in phase 4 now of Virginia wine, where people are getting out of the valley floors, not planting on the farms they already have, but are buying dedicated hillside vineyard sites and really getting up into the mountains. So I would think, Virginia wine, to make a long story longer, Virginia wine started in the 70s and 80s with the first pioneers that were brave enough to do it. And then from there, it kind of in the late 90s, early 2000s hit a phase of producing quality wines that people go, oh, wow, this, you know, everyone's coming into it with the worst expectations. So like,
Yeah.
oh, this isn't terrible. Like, wow, this doesn't suck. This is wine.
Yeah.
And you're
Yeah.
like, okay. And then
Yeah.
from there, I'd say in the 2010s, Virginia wine got even more credibility kind of in this sector of kind of consistently producing some solid wines. And now that we're in this fourth phase, I think 20 years from now, you're going to go, oh man, they can actually produce some awesome wines. But it's those vineyard sites are still being cleared and planted.
Yeah. Wow. So I want to go back to a couple things you mentioned. Just want to
Mhm.
ask you about. Okay. So the first thing you said is it's not widely distributed outside of Virginia. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? As somebody who works at a winery, it seems like you would want it out there more, but maybe not. I don't know.
Right. It's the classic universal winery paradox, which is if you sell the wine in the tasting room, you get every dollar at the retail value you can.
Yeah.
If you sell on distribution, uh, you feel like you're taking a cut or a loss, but you can
Yeah.
move more wine. So personally, one of my goals is to get Virginia wine produced in larger volumes and out into the public and into the masses. I'd say I produce things in a much larger lot size than you see in Virginia, kind of commonly, more of 1,000, 1,500 case lots. I don't want to just do 18 different 300 case lots. I really want
Yeah.
to get stuff out there that we can, you know, if approached by a distributor, say, I really want this, I'd love to sell it, in this market, in St. Louis. Like, can we get pallets of it? That I've got pallets ready to go for them.
Yeah.
So,
Wow. That's
so it's
interesting.
if you're the owner of a business and you can sell all the wine you make directly to people in your tasting room, it's a
Yeah.
lot more money, and
Yeah.
you're definitely not going to be complaining about it.
Right. Why
So,
bother with anything else? Yeah.
yeah. But I think always or at least in my experience with other winemakers, we're always the ones on the production side who want distribution because we want to get our product out there and we want more
Yeah.
people to try it. So
Yeah.
it's a
So
wine
and
paradox.
yeah, no, I can imagine. Now, one of the things you mentioned a minute ago, I was going to ask you about too, is you said that, kind of the perception of wine being made in Virginia. Like, is that a
Mhm.
real thing where somebody, if you say, hey, I make wine in France, people go, oh, wow. Or if I make wine in Napa, people go, oh, wow. But if you say I make wine in Virginia, do people go, oh, really? Like, I mean, is that really a thing? People really do that?
It depends on who you're dealing with, but yeah, definitely some people will say it. You'll definitely get oh, I didn't know they made wine in Virginia. You're like, oh, thanks. Feels good.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
when I was the first winery I was at in California, there was a Australian consultant there who's this wild man. And one time he took me over to another winery because he was helping him out. And, like they had some issues with Brett and VA on a tank. He's like, oh, let's go over and check him out, see what's going on. And we taste it, and it was just totally wrecked with Brett.
Hmm.
And he looked at me. It's like, this is what I expect Virginia wine tastes like. It's like,
Oh my
thanks.
gosh.
Yeah. I was like, thanks,
Wow.
man.
Oh wow.
So
That's,
it can be cutthroat out there,
yeah. So,
but
you work at a place called Hazy Mountain Vineyards, and
mhm.
so what's the story behind Hazy Mountain Vineyards? How did it get going, and and talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So it's owned by a single couple who they're from the area and have been operating a business in the area for a long time, and they were traveling and went across Europe with some friends and went to some wineries. They're like, man, this is awesome, but where we live is awesome too. Like, I bet we could grow grapes here, and like we can build these buildings and do this. So let's try to do it. And so they own the property already in this town called Swope. So that's the town where our kind of main production vineyards planted. This is in the Shenandoah Valley, west of a town called Stanton. So it's all the way like going up the mountains towards West Virginia. So it's up on the mountain hills. It was, they didn't buy it for planting grapes on. They bought it 10 years or 15 years before, but
Yeah.
decided in 2015, like, hey, let's do wine, let's do this. And so in 2016, they planted 12 acres. And then in 2017, I met them and came on board, and we planted that property out to 50 acres state. And then in 2018, purchased the property where the tasting room and our other 36-acre vineyard is, which is in the Monticello AVA I was
Hmm.
talking about. So it's basically we're split by this one mountain. So it's actually where the Appalachian Trail goes through. So all the Appalachian Trail hikers, it's right across the Blue Ridge Parkway. That splits the two properties. They're each like equally distant from that. So we've got a leg on each side. But in 2018, bought that property. In 2019, built the winery there, and then through 2020 and 2021, started building tasting room. And
Wow.
so I was the first employee hired to the project, which was kind of crazy because I was 22 at the time.
Wow.
But it all happened pretty quick.
Yeah. So you guys, how many acres now then do you guys own?
Yep. So we're 86 acres under vine total at the moment,
Wow.
and the two properties combined are not planted, something like 500 acres, I want to say.
Wow.
So there's, as far as plantable land on the rest of it, there's maybe another 25 acres we could do.
Yeah.
So, but we kind of want to feel things out for a while because in that first vineyard area I was talking about in the valley, it's there's only one other vineyard nearby within a 5 mile radius. Who's he's been out there since the early 2000s. It's Oxeye Vineyards, awesome guy John Kears, who he kind of helped set us up and get us on the path to success. But we're kind of already in a still proving itself region with Virginia, and then
Hmm.
we're like on the absolute frontier of Virginia to top on top of that. So I know you've probably seen how many varieties we have planted. It's quite a lot because
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff we have to experiment with because we're
Hmm.
out there on the fringes.
Yeah. That's interesting though. So I was going to ask you about it later, but I might as well ask you now. So when you have this land in Virginia now and you're going to grow grapes, how do you guys decide what to grow, and what was the decision as far as deciding what varieties you want to put down in the ground?
Yeah, I mean it's pretty much totally based on the lucky scenario of having people that made the mistakes first before us for like 20 years.
Yeah.
And so, because when we first started planting the owner of our property, he said, I want to plant Merlot. And the guy was talking about John Kears at Oxide said, he's like, yeah, you can plant it, but it's going to die. It's like, oh, why? And he like went through a list and told him like, you can't plant this, you can't plant this, you can't plant this.
Yeah.
And so our Swope Vineyard there in the valley, it's a much colder site, a much colder site. So this year we got down to -4 degrees Fahrenheit. So
Wow.
it's a pretty cold property, and so for that reason we have predominantly kind of Austrian German varieties, and then some more cold hardy French stuff. So on that property, it's as far as whites go, Riesling, Chardonnay, Gruner Veltliner, Chenin Blanc, Pinot Blanc, a little bit of Petit Manseng, and that's it for whites. For reds, it's Cabernet Franc, Pinot Noir, Blaufränkisch or Limburger, and then small kind of experimental blocks of Saperavi and Skipetino.
Wow. Okay.
And so all those are kind of based on the ability that they can drop down. We've been as cold as -8 since I've worked there, and Merlot, for instance, the trunk would just split in half. So it's more of there's a lot of stuff we can't plant. And at our other property, your classic Bordeaux varietals are what have done really well in that area. So we've got all your classics aside from Cabernet Sauvignon, really big on Cab Franc for kind of our big flagship red. And then on top of those, we've got Chardonnay, Nebbiolo, and Albarino. So, and a
Wow.
little bit of Blaufränkisch there.
Wow. So it doesn't come down to what you want to grow. I mean, you could say, hey, I want to make this, like you were talking about, the owner wanted to have Merlot, but if it just won't grow there, then you can't do it. You gotta go
Yeah,
with what grows in the area.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's one of those things of what will grow and then also what we can grow well. So like I say, we opt for Cab Franc over Cabernet Sauvignon because we've got some sites where we could definitely produce, I think, some good cabs, but in those same blocks, we can hopefully produce some great Cab Francs. And so I don't want to give up what could be great for something that's good just because everyone wants to grow Cab Sauv. There's
Yeah.
some other growers in the area that produce Cab Sauv, and I may well buy some fruit from them and play with. So kind of keep it at that for now.
Yeah. Interesting. So, as you know, and we'll talk about your wine journey in just a second. You worked out here in California, but yeah, as you know, Cabernet Sauvignon is like the grape out here in California, right? So, what is
Yeah,
it out in Virginia? Is Cabernet Franc that's the grape out there?
it's uh, it's something they haven't hammered down yet, and I kind of don't want them to
Okay.
because at first the state grape was Viognier, and
Okay.
I despise Viognier.
Oh,
I
okay.
hate it so much.
Okay.
Not really as a wine, but just to work with. I
Okay.
don't know if you've when you're doing harvest if you had to mess with Viognier at all.
Yeah, we made a vignette. Yeah.
It's I don't know what it was like for you all, but out here it's tough. It is thick skins, so usually to get any reasonable press fraction of it, you've got to press it almost twice to
Okay.
get it out of those skins. So it tends to throw a high pH and really just be a mess out here. So and it doesn't really grow well here, but they made that the state grape for a while, and they pitched making the state grape Petit Verdot, which was another one that was like, please don't. Like
Okay.
we can make some good solid Petit Verdots here, but not something to make the flagship. I
Hmm.
think for us, it should be kind of another 15, 20 years of just producing wines that people start to seek out. Like, California, the reason Cab Sauv's the grape there is it's what everyone wants.
Right.
They're looking for it. It's not, you don't have producers trying to push a Cab Sauv on you. It's
Right.
the consumers asking for it.
I see. Yeah.
So it's kind of same with Pinot Noir in the Willamette Valley.
Right.
So if you're not producing it, you're messing up.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I remember about our vignette that we got is, and this was at a different winery, but um,
Hmm.
they came in the macro bins and there was a dead mouse in with the grapes. And I'll always remember that being the vignette. Now, obviously
Yeah,
that doesn't matter, but that's just something that I remember seeing. And it was like,
yeah.
pretty,
That's something in plants in your mind. You're like,
it
I don't
is.
want to drink that one.
Never forget that. Yeah. And it's like,
Yeah,
well, what do we do? It's like, well, nothing. The
yeah.
fermentation will take care of all that. So anyway, we got the mouse out of it, so it didn't go in the wine. But um, yeah, I just remember that about it. So, all right. So you talked about the AVAs. You said that you guys have fruit from two AVAs that are your
Hmm.
properties, obviously. So, and you touched on them just a little bit, but just touch on
Hmm.
them again just for a second. What makes those sites special, and what do they grow well that you guys are able to make great wines with?
Yeah, as far as our sites themselves or the ABAs
Yo, your
themselves.
sites, your sites.
Yeah. So for the site at our Afton Vineyards, that's where our tasting room is. It's very special for the area. I mean, especially for the kind of Piedmont, Central Virginia area, because what we have is kind of this lonely little mountain peak that pops up. So the entire 36 acres is southeastern exposure with all just, I mean, it's a perfect sloped hillside to where, I mean, it gets pretty steep. Nervous on a tractor steep, but the
Wow.
property goes from about 780-foot elevation to 1140, and the vineyard's all the way through that. So it's a definite steep incline, but it's very very rocky soil. So it's all decomposing granite from large boulder all the way down to pebblestone mixed in. So what we get, I mean, in Virginia, especially Central Virginia, you've got a problem with dark, wet clay that's
Mm.
compacted, and so you
Mm-hmm.
get kind of odd, thin, stripped wines from that. I think the states really learned how to grow within that and produce solid wines. But if you're starting out, it's difficult to make a complex wine on damp clay.
Yeah.
So our site, it's a clay loam mix, all broken up with a plenty of rich loam. It's a dark, kind of almost burnt brick clay with all this boulder kind of sandy loam mixed in. So it's extremely well draining. It's got this awesome slope with great air drainage because for Virginia, from the growing perspective, what we're fighting is moisture. I mean,
Mm.
just across the board, and moisture, because it's
Yeah.
fungicides are really what we're focusing on with sprays because we're looking for the state. I'd say the average canopy spray per year is probably 10 to 14 because we're looking at, depending on the AVA you're in, our sites are sub 30 inches of rain a year, seemingly. It's kind of where it's sticking at, but some properties are up over 50 inches a year average. So you're getting a lot of rainfall. And so having well drained soil that's going to just, one, let the water run off, and then two, disperse it if it does get taken up. And then it's just that solar panel, let the heat come in, dry everything out, burn off that morning dew. It really cuts down on our fungal issues so we can produce, wines that actually get some nice extraction. We're not having to spray for downy mildew all the time.
Yeah. Right. Wow.
So that's for that property, that's huge. And so I'm very excited about the potential of the Reds will be able to produce. I think it'll be the first chance we get with the Virginia wine that I've worked with. There's fruit wise, say buying from anyone else or anything, to actually produce some pretty big, concentrated, bold wines that are naturally coming to that point and not me forcing them into that. Because that's
Yeah.
one thing you run into on the East Coast. I mean, just for everybody, it's not on the West Coast, is wanting to push towards that West Coast style where it's easy to, really take a wine and make it massive and draw that out of it without forcing it. And so there's a tendency to want to kind of jam and push that through with our fruit. But I think this property will naturally show that. We had our first vintage of fruit from that site last year in 2022, and already it's like, okay, this wine's got some heft and some meat behind it.
Wow.
Whereas opposed to our other property, which is in the Shenandoah Valley, so it's the one that's on the western side, kind of heading towards West Virginia. It's the last property before you get into the national forest. So it's way up on the slopes, and if you're out there, you can see, and it makes sense that all the soil, because it's just a deep silt loam on top of kind of a broken shale. So it's a really light limestone silt loam out there. So it's not super heavy. It's just kind of fine sandy. It's not even pebbly. It's just loose soil. You can see it just came from the mountains eroding down over time. As that mountain range, the Appalachians are actually the oldest. They think the oldest mountain ranges in the world, and so they at one point were taller than the Himalayas, they say, but have eroded down over time. The craziest part, to go full geology nerd on you, is the entire kind of mid-Atlantic at one point, an infinite number of millions of years ago, was all under the Iapetus Ocean. And
Mm.
so this was all seafloor. Over time, things changed. The oceans recede. So all that aquatic life kind of dies and calcifies. All those shells and everything become just a hard crust coastal sea plain that's dried, and then over another infinite amount of millions of years that just folds. And then you've got, because they still find today aquatic, saltwater fossils on top of the mountains from like ancient sea life that has folded up
Wow.
into the top.
Yeah.
Rain's been hitting that, and that's been eroding down the whole time. So you get this weird, cool mix of kind of ocean floor soil in the mountains of Virginia. So it's cool to think about, kind of
Yeah,
fun.
it is. Yeah, really. Interesting.
But yeah, so that site, we get one thing, it's a cooler climate there as opposed to our property where tasting room is. So it's on, a especially warm day, maybe a 4-degree difference between the two properties, even though they're only about 25 miles apart from each other.
Mm.
But a pretty steep difference in the nighttime temperatures, especially for the areas surrounding us, because being up on the hillsides, we get a nice diurnal flux, but we really get a nice steep decrease in the temps in the evening. So, even if we have a 100-degree day, you're gonna have, at worst, a low 80s night. You're not gonna have, an 89-degree night where it's just cooking off all your acidity and the
Yeah.
wine's just getting flabby. So we have that on both properties, but that cooler property, we've gotten more vintages under our belt there. We've been producing fruit from there since 2018, and it's showing this really awesome, kind of beautiful feminine quality in the reds and nice bright acidity in the whites. And so the reds, we're getting awesome fruit and awesome tannin structure, but it's this kind of delicate style. So it's almost more like that Loire Valley Beaujolais, kind of what you would imagine
Hmm.
fruit wise, and kind of extraction to where you can have a Beaujolais like Domaine or Diachon from can't blank on the name now because I'm trying to say it. Of course, I can't think of it, but it's one of the Cru Beaujolais. It's just got awesome, giant, meaty extraction, being a Gamay, but it's still kind of soft and feminine. That kind of seems like the vein to focus in for that property. Whereas
Yeah.
our other property, where the taster room is, we might be able to produce something with some heft behind it. So for me, that's extremely exciting because it's kind of like pulling fruit from two different worlds, even though
Yeah.
they're 25 miles away.
That's crazy. So we were talking earlier, you and I, before we got started here, and so I was going to ask you before we talk about the wines you guys are making. So, what is your story, Luke? I mean, how did you get involved in wine? And I know you said that you worked out here where I'm at, and I know the winery you worked at. So, go ahead and talk
Yeah.
about it. How'd you get into wine, and what's your wine journey been like?
Yeah. So I grew up on a farm and grew up raising pigs with my family, kind of heritage breed pigs that we raise fair to finish. So from the pigs are born all the way down to we take them, have them slaughtered, and then distribute it to restaurants in Washington, D.C., and kind of
Hmm.
bigger cities within Virginia. And so grew up on the farming meat side of things and actually started learning about terroir through fresh pork, which is kind of nuts. But
Wow.
because my family didn't drink at all, for like 26 years, I have two brothers, so my parents had three sons, and they're like, okay, we gotta do the good old Southern traditional, like we're gonna raise values. So they didn't drink for 26 years raising us. Alcohol
Wow.
was like not part of our youth or anything, but we all found our way to it.
Yeah.
This it's
That's usually
not
how
hard
it
to
goes.
find your way
Yeah.
into alcohol.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and so I started making booze in the house when I was in high school. Now I'm the youngest, so they let that slide.
Yeah.
But so we raised animals. We raise animals outdoors, and so throughout the different seasons, you were taking these pigs that some of them eat in pasture, some of them get finished in the fall and winter in the kind of hardwoods where you have a big mass crop, so acorns, hazelnuts, hickory nuts. When you have those animals, if you compare one that's just been in pasture the entire time to one that was finished on acorns, you could pick up on that in the meat, even just
Wow.
in fresh meat. Like definitely on cured meat for something like if you have prosciuttos or Spanish Iberico hams, for instance. they get down to a science with it for the cured meats on exactly where to put the pig's water in correlation to their food so that they're runny enough to get the intermuscular balance and everything and to get the nuttiness. But at a more simple level, you can pick up on, oh, this animal's been eating a diet that I can tell.
Wow.
And so when I turned 18, left the farm, of course, as any teenager does. You leave farm, start working in restaurants. Uh, Kind of got the wine bug there when I was like 19. So there was cool bartenders let me taste stuff. And as soon as I turned 21, moved out to California and jumped in at Hellwig Winery out there in Sierra Nevada foothills in Amador, who were they're just the coolest, best people. Gave me my first chance. I went and met them, and yeah, it was one of those funny things growing up on a farm. It opens some doors for you because you meet people and they're like, "What do you know about this?" I'm like, "Well, nothing." They're like, "What are you doing?" Like, "I'm a farmer." Like, "Okay, he's gonna work." Like he
Yeah.
may not know anything, but it's the a strong back can kind of open doors for you.
Yeah.
May not be the best jobs you get, but you can kind of trudge through.
Yeah.
But so I got to do a harvest with them, and, everywhere in the cellar, doing lab work and everything, and really got to get fully immersed in it. And that was, yeah, I couldn't have picked a better entry place because Hellwig, I mean, they've got multiple vineyard sites on multiple properties. They actually have two separate production facilities. They've got one large production uh, winery and barrel room where kind of a lot of everything happens, and they've got another winery and barrel cave there at the estate itself, where all the
Mm.
estate fruit gets produced. So, I mean, it's just a perfect place to start to jump in and be like, okay, here's a vineyard that's got 8 different blocks of Zinfandel. Like, we're gonna dive into all of them, and they're just the best teachers and best people. Actually, the owners came out and visited me this past year. They were in the area and reached out, and so I got to show them and give them a chance to see kind of what's going on over here, which was very exciting, very
That
cool of them.
is. Yeah.
But yeah, so started out in California was awesome. I mean, Amador is old vines in country. I mean, we were getting to work with some fruit and I think some purchased fruit that was like 60-year-old vines, and then
Yeah.
some stuff was like 75, 85-year-old Zinfandel vineyards, which is just crazy. And it's
Yeah.
cowboy country out there, which is very cool.
Yeah.
And it was an awesome learning curve and kind of way to start out. And then from there, moved back to Virginia, did a vintage at another winery, or a year at another winery as assistant winemaker, and then got linked up with the owners of the project I'm at now. So they were looking for somebody, and I came recommended. And so the rest has been harmony since then. But as our vineyards were getting planted, because the first stuff got planted 16, I came on 17. The first harvest was in 18. So as stuff was still getting planted, I had the opportunity to work with some other wineries during harvest. So some other Virginia wineries, King Family Vineyards in our area. It was awesome. And then got to go down to New Zealand and do a harvest, which was a crazy experience in the best and worst of ways.
Yeah. Well, and
But
you and I were talking about it earlier, and everybody I talk to in the world of wine has done a harvest in New Zealand, and so you're no different than that. So just talk about that. How did it go? What was that like? I mean, and why New Zealand? Because I know there's other places you can go and you can do a harvest. But it seems like people go there. So
yeah, for New Zealand, it's really, if you're going to do a harvest internationally, in the off season, because the idea is, okay, because I did that one 2019 as our winery itself was being built. So we'd harvested our first stuff actually with another winery in 18. That September, October, great, got all that put away, good to go. And then I'm able to hop down to New Zealand for March, April, do harvest down there, and you can come back and really bounce back and forth. So that if you're not locked into a winery yet, you're just doing the I'm working harvest across the world thing, you can
yeah.
bounce around for several years, and that would be a very cool life to have for 4 or 5 years.
Well,
But
before you continue, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to say something
Mhm.
about that. One of the things that amazed me when I was working at these wineries, right, is I thought everybody who worked there just loved wine and wanted to be part of this great thing, right? But
Yeah.
it's really not that way. I mean, a lot of people just want to do the traveling. And so they're like, hey, I'll do a harvest here in California, then I'll go to New Zealand, and then, I'll go somewhere else. And it's just, they just do it for the traveling. It's not about the wine.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's pretty good money because you're gonna get overtime pay
Yeah.
because harvest hours are crazy. I
Right.
mean, depending on the winery you're at, we work 7 days a week, and most wineries you're at least working 6 days a week,
Yeah.
and they may put you on if a winery's big enough, they'll have rotational shifts, but you're still looking at 12-hour shifts. If you're working six of those a week, you're pulling in a ton of hours, a ton of
Yeah.
overtime. So
Hmm.
I haven't checked to see what the pay range is now for a winery intern, but say if it's even $15 an hour,
Hmm.
you know, the hours you're going to get out of that, especially in California. I didn't realize California has a very advantageous for a winery worker way of doing overtime, where it's time and a half over 40, and
Yeah.
then double time over 60. So we are getting a ton of double time. That was like the first time I'd ever gotten like a $1,500 weekly check. I was like
Wow.
21. I
Yeah.
was like, oh man, I'm living now.
You are. Yeah.
And
Good
until
money.
you have to pay taxes on that one.
Right.
But so yeah, I mean, if you're traveling, if you're in your 20s and you just want to work hard for 2.5, 3 months in each hemisphere, I mean, you can walk away with enough cash to keep traveling, hanging out, doing your thing, and it's definitely not a bad gig. It's skills that transfer because it's the reason everyone does New Zealand is because you really have three main choices for Southern Hemisphere. If you only speak English,
Hmm.
it's New Zealand, Australia, or South Africa. New Zealand and Australia, I believe, are the easiest to get visas for. I didn't
Okay.
try Australia. New Zealand's kind of the one where I found the job first. I was like, okay, cool, I'll go there. I believe Argentina is still pretty locked down, not COVID wise. Prior to COVID, they're kind of locked down on who was coming in and getting visas to work. Chile is much more open to it, but you have to be pretty fluent in Spanish. So New Zealand's, I would think Australia might be easier to get a visa for. New Zealand's a pretty strict country because I was down there in 19, so before COVID, but
Yeah.
it's pretty nuts. I mean, if you get a worker's visa there, you get 6 months. And before I got on my flight, they almost didn't let me get on my flight in Virginia because I bought a one-way ticket. 'Cause I didn't know when harvest was going to be over. And
Yeah.
they're like, "Yeah, you can't come if you don't have a return flight." Like what? I actually had to prove to them I had enough like money in my bank account that I could buy a flight out. Like,
Wow.
okay, now you can come because they love for you to visit, but you're not staying.
Yeah. Interesting.
So
So what did
yeah.
you make out there in New Zealand? Sauvignon Blanc?
Uh, yes, Sauvignon Blanc's a big one. So I was in the Nelson area, so that's the northern tip of the South Island, which is where some super famous hops come from. But we were kind of over the hill from Marlborough, and out there, Sauvignon Blanc's huge. But they also did Pinot Noir, Gewürztraminer, Chardonnay. They did some Riesling as well. I'm trying to think. That particular winery did not do a lot of reds, but Sauvignon Blanc's, of course, the big one. Because
Yeah.
I mean, even just as you know, a winery trying to pay its bills, you can sell bulk Sauvignon Blanc very easily. So if you've got a decent bumper crop harvest, you can sell to the guys over the hill in Marlborough, no problem, because they're going to pump it into a blend. So they call it the Savalanche when Sauvignon Blanc comes in. All the guys on there are like, you better get ready for the Sauvignon, boys.
Yeah.
It'll be 500 tons in a couple days, and so it's just rolling.
Wow. So coming back here then to you now you're in Virginia. Now you were when you were there when they were just starting to build the winery, did you have any input on what you guys put in the winery as far as equipment, tanks, that kind of stuff? Or I mean, do you get any kind of input into anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I was still new at that point, and had not been a head winemaker yet. So we were working with a consultant, Matt Tufano from King Family Vineyards. He's a winemaker. He's originally from Crow's Hermitage. He's been in Virginia for 20 years now, maybe.
Well,
And so he's kind of one of my mentors along the way. And he had a heavy hand and input on kind of like, okay, here's what you do for success. And thankfully, I agree with most everything he was saying. So
Yeah.
that worked out well because as the winery was getting built, I actually was kind of splitting my time between operating the vineyard and then actually building the facility itself. So I was working with the guys, the electrical crews, the steel guys, all everybody, the plumbers, so that I knew every aspect of the building as best as I could. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and actually, the rest of my team, the vineyard managers, my assistant winemaker, myself, that first harvest in 2019, that winter, they all went and helped the construction team actually build our tasting room. So we were all down there pouring concrete in the footers and everything. So
Wow.
we've all got a pretty strong tie to the property and the estate.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I had input on it, but and definitely had a huge hand in it. So I know my building.
Yeah. Well, I was looking at the website, right? And I think what I saw was some square tanks. Do you guys have square tanks there?
Yes, so I've
And
got
they're dark. Like,
four.
are they made of concrete?
Yep, I've got four
Okay.
concrete tanks. Yep, they're
Cool.
numbers from Burgundy, so they're really cool. They're 40 hectoliter tanks, so kind of a perfect size maybe for concrete. So I can ferment as far as red fruit, on fermentation on the skins, about 5 tons in each of them, maybe four and a half to five, and then aging. So I do some Cab Franc and Blaufränkisch that is fermented and aged exclusively in concrete.
Wow.
This
Okay.
whole thing, never touch oak, and that's kind of especially for the Cab Franc, it's adapted from a Loire style, kind of your classic Chenin, to where it's just one of those ones that you pull out this whole different flavor profile in Cab Franc with it. You get this really cool level of non-fruit aromas that come out. It changes it. The tannin structure, you're getting all the tannins are just from the grape skins itself at that point. You're not getting any oak tannin influence. So
Hmm.
there's a lot less sweetness and more of kind of like a really nice savory tart fruit quality. And then concrete, it's the weirdest descriptor, but I can kind of pick up on when a wine's 100% concrete aged, especially Cab Francs, because they get this like strong minerality that comes through at
Hmm.
first. And as it's in the glass, it kind of opens up to where it gets this like really irony quality, but like blood iron, and then kind of gets to like an ox blood, beef blood, venison blood kind of thing that comes across on the nose and not on the palate, but it's like this really distinct, crazy gamey quality that it's pleasant. It's not gross. It's a little addicting to try to get it to come out in the wine. It's
Yeah.
probably the strangest thing that I'm always pursuing.
Yeah.
Everything else is more traditional, just trying to produce solid wines. But that one, I'm like, how do I bring out that wild gamey flavor?
Interesting. Wow. And so the concrete tanks, they're square. So like what's
Mm-hmm.
the I've seen obviously and I've worked with some that are, egg shape and that kind of stuff. What is the
Mm-hmm.
what's the square and does it even matter?
The square at that point is just it's dimensionally more advantageous for the winery. It just uses space better.
Yeah.
Uh, there's no crazy pitch on it like with the eggs. I know they say the shape is perfect to keep the leaves in suspension and everything.
Right.
There's nothing like that with the square ones. Just a shape that works well. I haven't noticed anything negative from that shape. It just kind of fits in its space perfectly. I mean, it's a big thing you see, especially oddly enough in Argentina. There's a ton of concrete square tanks that were used originally that I don't know if it was cost savings or what, but like in the 60s and 70s, it seems like a ton of those wineries just built hallways of huge tanks. They're all just concrete. And
Wow.
so it's a nice vessel because the big benefit of concrete is it does breathe. So you're picking up minerality from it in a weird way that does come out and is nice and balanced, but you get a little bit of that micro oxygenation at a much, much reduced level compared to oak, but you actually get something compared to stainless steel, you get nothing.
Yeah.
So it kind of, when you have, a red that's been in there where it's getting that little bit of micro ox, it's kind of taking the edges off the tannins, working those edges down, softening it, but not bringing that sweetness to it that you get with oak. Makes it interesting and fun.
Yeah, no, I'm always fascinated by those wines that come out of whatever that's made out of those concrete tanks. Yeah, those are
Hmm.
cool. All right, so one of the highlights, and this podcast is really, I like to educate people, and I like to be educated on all things wine. But you guys made a point on the website to mention that you guys have your own mobile bottling line, and I know bottling probably doesn't sound that exciting, but um,
Yeah.
just the amount of steps that go from, you know, can you just give us a quick rundown of, okay, I'm assuming people who don't know are probably thinking like, okay, it goes from the barrel right into the bottle or something, but there's this whole process that you have to go through in order to get it in there. So can you just run through that with us real quick?
Yes. I'll start it just so it's not confusing. I'm pausing too much in the middle of it. I will say the mobile bottling line, all that means is the equipment that's used to bottle wine. So when it's going in its stages of entering a bottle, getting a cork or a screw cap, a label, and everything, a mobile bottling line means that all that equipment is in a 53-foot semi truck trailer and lives inside there. So we can take it to other wineries and service for them. So it's nothing. The technology itself isn't any different. It's just literally in a truck that moves around.
Hmm.
And so for the stages of prepping for bottling, because this is a very good question to ask, because it's amazing what people think happens when you
Right.
bottle.
Yeah.
But my own brother was like, "So what do you guys do? Like roll the barrel over and then just like pull that off and put it in the bottle?" I was like, "No."
Yeah. Right.
So we'll take a white or red, for instance. You're pulling out whether it's been in tank or it's been in barrel. What you want to do is with the wine, it's going to have sediment that settles to the bottom. So we do what's called racking, where the wine is pulled off of the top of the sediment because it settles at the bottom. We pull off of that so it's as clean as possible. Assuming the wine's stable and you're not having to do anything crazy to it, which won't get caught in the weeds on that.
Hmm.
Um, you're taking it from that stage, then you're going to filter it. We sterile filter all our wines. So what that means is there's a couple different types of filters out there, different technology, but basically you've taken this wine that's been racked off of whatever vessel it's in. It's in a tank and as clean as you can get it. Now you're kind of using a pump, pulling it from that tank, running it through filter media, whether it's a cartridge filter or a crossflow filter or a plate and frame filter with pads.
Hmm.
It's passing through that media and at various micron sizes. The smaller it gets, the more it's taking out. Sterile filtration means that it's at least 0.45 micron, which is a pore size that is smaller than the size of yeast and bacteria. So the yeast and bacteria don't make it through. So
Hmm.
it's just a pump pulling from a tank, going across filter media into another tank. Usually that's a two-pass process, but now you've got clean wine in a clean tank that's been sterile filtered. At that point, we're connecting a hose to the tank. The hose runs to a pump, which is pulling from the tank and going into the truck. The truck has hard lines inside of it, or even if you just have a filter setup or a bottling station in your winery, same thing. You're going into a hard line. It's going to go through two filters before it's bottled again. Even though you filtered it, you want to make sure. So these are two cartridge filters, which just means it's kind of this filter media in a plastic housing. And it'll go through 0.45 micron, which is a pre-filter, point or sorry, 0.65, which is pre-filter, 0.45 for sterile. So we know nothing funny is going to happen with it.
Hmm.
And then it's going into bottle fillers, which just fills up with gravity. It's just this big bowl with turning heads. Ours is a 12 head. The bottles go up, they fill up with gravity, come off. We've got a little nitrogen sparge that levels them off to make sure it's the same height. And then it gets a cork put in, then it goes down. It gets the label, capsule foil, comes out. We stick it in a case, run tape on it, put it on a pallet, and go and stack it up.
Yeah, it's quite a process. I mean, I've seen that process, and I've actually did a little bottling. It's hard work. It's not easy.
Yeah.
But yeah, this the whole all the things you have to do to get the wine right, like you're talking about with filtering. I mean, the last thing you
Hmm.
want is some activity going on when it's in the bottle and all that. So you got to get rid of all that. But I just think it's a fascinating thing to see just that
Yeah.
whole process.
Yeah, because I mean, for any winemaker out there, unless they've reached a level of chill, I can't imagine. It's like the most stressful day for you, because it's even more stressful than like a long harvest day, because at that point the wine is what it is. You cannot change anything else. You have to hope nothing wrong during it, because once the wine's been filtered, it's as stripped down and as exposed as it's going to be. So that's where it's extremely sensitive to oxygen. It's extremely sensitive to anything else, because all that sediment and kind of uh, stuff floating in the wine, those are good oxygen scavengers in a way, and they kind of bind up with other things. So all the leaves are full of proteins and amino acids. Those kind of bind up and eat stuff. But when you've got it stripped down to nothing, I mean, you're at a high level of risk. And
Yeah.
then you're hoping you didn't mess anything up, and that your math is correct, that your science is correct, that your taste buds are correct, and that everything's right, and you're not going to get a curveball out of left field once it's been in bottle for a year. Because one of the things I mentioned when I was saying that, in the weeds on when I explain the process, is there's a couple other things with white wine specifically before you bottle. You want to make sure that you're protein stable and that you're tartrate stable. So
Hmm.
tartrates are, for those of you out there, if you've ever had a glass of wine, it looks like little diamonds or shards of glass in the bottom of your glass. That is tartaric crystals. So what that is tartaric acid that formed into a crystallized form, and so it literally crystallizes and looks like glass. It won't harm you. It has no effect on the wine, but it is a industry standard that to have that in your wine, like you messed up, like you're an
Yeah.
amateur.
Hmm.
And then so we go through tartaric stabilization, which is you just basically take the wine 1 degree above its freezing point for its given alcohol level. So a lot of wines that's around 22 degrees, and so we'll hold it at that for 2 to 3 weeks, and that kind of forces those crystals to form and drop out. And so that's kind of the main way of mitigating that.
Hmm.
The other big thing you're looking for is protein stability. So if you have a bottle of wine that gets warm and it's got a haze in it and kind of looks blurry, that means you didn't have protein stability. And so the biggest thing to get protein stability is with a natural product called bentonite clay. I mean, bentonite clay is used in seemingly every industry for everything you can imagine.
Hmm.
It's a natural clay. It's got a positive ion charge to it naturally. You add it to the wine at a kind of parts per million level based on your protein instability. You check that by taking the wine, basically boiling it. You get a reading of it beforehand, measuring the NTUs, essentially boil it, and then afterwards you measure the difference. And some wines don't really have a high level of proteins in them to begin with. Like Chardonnay is not that crazy, but something like Gruner Veltliner has a much higher protein level, is much more prone to protein instability. So it's one where we usually have to make an addition to get stability there. But you
Hmm.
add the clay, it binds up because it's charged, as opposed to the other charges. Literally just binds to those, precipitates out at the bottom of the tank, and you rack off it. You're good to go. So it's all pretty simple stuff, which also makes it kind of unnerving. It's a
Yeah.
little too easy almost.
Yeah, definitely. That's interesting. Well, let's talk about some of your wines now. So the first thing is you guys make a Pinot Noir. So,
Hmm.
you do mention on the website, it says that it's an old world style Pinot Noir. So, talk to us about that. What makes it an old world style? And just talk, I mean, how does it compare to one you mentioned, Willamette Valley earlier, to a Pinot that's made out in Willamette Valley?
Hmm. Yeah, so ours for us, we're looking at compared to Willamette Valley, a cooler climate. So, in kind of a similar number of growing degree days to somewhere between Burgundy and Bordeaux. California's got an infinite amount of growing degree days. We're a little bit more reduced.
Hmm.
And so, much cooler temperatures, not the same level of extraction, and not the same level of alcohol, and not the same level of fruit as you're going to get West Coast style. So, California obviously being the most fruit forward you can get out of anywhere in the country. Willamette being a balance of a great level of concentration, but also cooler style. So it's a little more balanced. It's got more acidity in there, and it's more kind of more of a feminine structure for Pinot, I'd say. And then when you get into that old world style, I would say you're looking at something that's much more prone to being a lighter extraction, an earthier quality, and then more acidity at the forefront. And
Hmm.
the acidity isn't balanced with as much fruit. So it's more balanced with savory kind of components and flavors. So that's a fair description of that.
Yeah.
Sure, there's a
So
sommelier out there somewhere saying, like, that's not how you describe old world.
yeah. Well, you're probably right. Yeah. So now, is that a popular wine that you guys make? Is that I noticed some of them are just wine club exclusive. So is that one of those that's
Mhm.
wine club exclusive? And why is that? Just because it's so special, you want to make sure that your clients can get it.
Yeah, I mean the big thing is it has been very popular. It's one that that one the first one we released, first one we made, it's the first Pinot I ever made. It was a 2019, and so that one's only Wine Club exclusive now, just because the volume we had available at the taster room we sold through, and
Hmm.
now we've pulled it back and we've got some available. Just it's kind of in the library now.
Cool.
We'll release our 2020 fairly soon, and I'll have a much larger quantity of that, so that'll be open to everyone.
Hmm.
The wine club exclusive stuff is usually things that have already been available at taste room and have been pulled back, and so now it's kind of in that pulling some back to library. And when I say library, it's not so that we can just hold it back for a year and then double the price on it and re-release it. It's more of,
Yeah.
which seems to be a thing.
Yeah. That
It's more of
happens.
we're gonna hold it back for a little bit and kind of take the risk on our own to see how it's drinking. And some things ebb and flow. And I'd say that the Pinot's drinking that 2019, it was drinking very youthful when we released it at taste room, but it sold through very quickly. I wish I could have had it out longer,
Hmm.
but people liked it, which was great.
Yeah.
But now it's kind of ebbed into a different stage to where it's got a little more structure to it. So it was youthful and kind of bright and nice acidity, and the tannins were still kind of tight and fine. Those have softened out, so it's showing a lot more fruit and a lot more balance and structure. So it's at a really exciting stage, and Pinot's definitely difficult. I'd say for Virginia, there's only a handful of people that make Pinot, period,
Hmm.
and it is not something known that is done or known as being something that's done well in the state. And there's a couple people, and Cedar Ridge in Virginia got a great reputation for their Pinot Noir. It's awesome. They produce a small amount of it, but it's gotten some awesome acclaim.
I've heard Pinot's just a pain. Period. I mean, no matter
Yeah,
where you're making it, it's pain anywhere you do it. So, all right. So you guys have a red. I guess it's like a Bordeaux blend then. The BDX, I think, is what you guys
yeah.
call it. So talk about that one. Is that I, I mean, what's the blend, and how do you determine what the blend's going to be? Is it all about how it tastes, or is it kind of set? Like we want to have at least this amount of cab, or how does it go?
And yeah, it's totally based on taste and kind of what the vintage gave us. It's going to be a blend of Bordeaux varietals, and with that, in the years previous, before Monticello AVA Vineyard was up and going, so I was purchasing fruit to make those wines from other local growers. So it's also based on who I could get fruit from, and kind of going through and of the Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, Merlot, maybe even some Malbec that I purchased, going through and kind of selecting and moving things around. For the BDX, the kind of idea and structure behind it is a nice, balanced, medium bodied wine. So we're looking at something that's very food friendly and approachable. It's got a nice weight, but it's not heavy. It's not crushing you with tannins.
Hmm.
It's definitely something that you can have with uh, a leaner red meat, and of course nice fatty piece of beef. But it's something that's kind of balanced in between the two. It's not by any means like a big hammer wine,
Hmm.
and so. usually I'm identifying out the strongest, kind of weightiest lots of those varieties we have. And I'm pulling those for the single varietal so I can make this nice balanced medium structured blend. So it's kind of keeping it in that range. It's pleasant.
Hmm. So, one of the wines I saw on the website is, and I know you said it earlier, but I don't know how to say it. It's Petit Manseng. Did I say that
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Yep. Petite Manseng.
Okay. I know there's a million grape varieties out there, and that one I've never heard of. So, What's that all about? What can we compare it to? And talk about that wine.
Yeah. Man, what to compare it to is a difficult question. So it's a grape from the south of France. It's mainly grown there. You don't see it. I don't even know outside of Virginia where it's gaining popularity. It's gaining a ton of popularity for us in the state because it grows very well.
Hmm.
So it's a loose cluster because the rainfall issue I was talking about before. It is what has the biggest bearing on our life. So Petite Manseng, small berries, kind of small berries with a good strong skin, but not as thick of a skin that causes issues. Hangs with a loose cluster. Hangs very well throughout the season because we do have hurricane season to contend with here, which usually
Mm-hmm.
comes August, September, but can come October as well. But it's a much more durable grape. Not to say that it's lacking anything because of durability, but it's just something you can hang through a storm and be pretty confident with. It has the tendency to be formidable in the vineyard to an extent because it can produce really high potential alcohol. It can shoot up in bricks and maintain a very low pH and a very high TA.
Mm.
And so, for anyone that doesn't know, bricks is the measurement of fermentable sugars in the wine. So, and pH is pH, and then TA is the total acidity measured in grams per liter. So, to give context and scale, to produce a 13% alcohol Chardonnay, you're looking 22 to 23 bricks. You're looking usually on Chardonnay, if it's coming in at 3.2 pH, like that's solid, and a TA, those total grams per liter of acid around 7. Like it's a good healthy range to be in. Like you got nice freshness, nice acidity.
Hmm.
That's great. Uh, the Petite Manseng is known for being able to come in at like 28 bricks. So you're talking a potential alcohol up over 16%, uh, a pH of like 2.98 while at
Wow.
28 bricks, and a TA of like 12. So
Wow.
just madness. But
Yeah.
we've been able to work with the grower we work with on this one because we grow an acre and a quarter of it ourselves in our sweat vineyard, and I've worked with another grower purchasing some of it from him just to kind of play with it and see how we can work it out. And we were able to get really great balanced numbers. So right there, kind of in that Chardonnay range, and really get a nice structured wine because at its worst, it's got so much acidity and so much potential alcohol that you've got to err on producing an off dry or sweet wine. It's got great numbers to do that,
Yeah.
but I've been able to bring in fruit that's perfect for making well balanced dry wines that aren't cracking over 14% alcohol and
Wow.
aren't eating your enamel off with acidity.
Yeah. Well, what does it taste like?
So that one's dependent on kind of the vineyard site and how it's produced. I'd say the ones I've made err on having a big kind of juicy structure to them with a really nice tropical fruit quality.
Hmm.
So you're getting into that like mangoey, not quite passion fruit, but definitely like mango pineapple, kind of also on the peachy side with a really nice lemon lime acidity in there. And then uh, it can very frequently have this odd kind of tinge to it. Mine have not shown it, but there's a lot of Petite Mansengs I've tasted do that's like this. It's not quite like a vegetal note, but there's like this distinct Petite Mansengy thing that can pick up on, and it'll show up in blends if it's got it. That I don't know if it's coming from improper ripening or canopy management or what, because I've not seen it in the ones from the fruit we've grown or
Hmm.
fruit we've purchased, but it is something that's out there. So if someone tries and they're like, I'm getting something weird, that can be in there. But other than that, it's just nice structured, full tropical wine.
Interesting.
It's
Yeah.
nothing crazy,
Love to
but
try
it's
it.
yeah,
I like anything that I've ever had, so that would be awesome.
yeah.
All right, so I got a couple more things for you. I know we're getting close to the end here. You've talked about Cabernet Franc already,
Mhm.
and people who listen to the show are probably tired of me talking about Cabernet Franc, but it is my favorite. And so you guys make one, and you've talked a little bit about it already. So talk about the Cabernet Franc. How do you make it, and what's the flavor profile on that wine?
Yeah, so that one, I make it a lot of different ways, and it's definitely kind of my biggest um, passion project wine. I'll say, like, that's the one I'm really obsessed with. Not to take away from any of the others, but I've got high goals for Cab Franc. So
Yeah.
we grow it on both properties. It's the largest red planting on both properties. So I think we're at 16 acres total of it.
Hmm.
Um, the two vineyard sites really determine the style a lot naturally, just on the fruit that's coming in. So before I even touch it, I mean, and I've done this treating them with the exact same oaks, exact same methods. They just completely show themselves drastically different. But for that reason, I play with it a good amount. I'd say my primary method of producing the Cab Franc from our Shenandoah Valley vineyard, so that's that limestone cooler climate one, is I love to do, as long as the fruit's clean, a nice 2 to 3 day cold soak on the front end. So when my fruit gets picked, we haul it in, and I keep it refrigerated overnight, 35 degrees, to keep the skins nice and tight, preserve the
Hmm.
acidity, kind of knocks off any potential bad bacteria that's temperature unstable. So it sets me up for a cold soak pretty well. On our processing side, we have a very delicate destemmer that it's called the cube, and so instead of being a basket destemmer that's spinning the clusters and knocking the
Yeah.
berries off, this drops through. It's almost set up more like how a lot of the new mechanical harvesters work. So it's these small beater arms that kind of just smack the cluster and the berries fall off and go onto a shaker table and roll through. And so with that, the grapes themselves just barely get a crack in them, which is important because we're keeping as whole berry as possible. I don't run any of my reds through a crusher. I just don't.
Mm.
I keep them as delicate, soft as possible. Get them in the tank. They're going in at 35 degrees. I don't put the chilling on because usually I ferment about 7 ton quantities unless it's in one of the concrete tanks, which is 4.5 to 5, but usually about 7 ton lot sizes. So grapes going at 35 degrees, they'll hold that temperature for several days, kind of drifting up to 55. So doing usually a 2 day cold soak. The end of 2 days, it's starting to get up to a temp where I can inoculate with yeast. So I get my yeast in there, get fermentation going, and then at that point, usually fermentation and maceration on the skins is about a month. So I try to keep on the cooler side first,
Hmm.
then let the temperatures build up until I get to that color kind of fastening temperature, which in fermentation, if you get to, I think, 86 degrees, that's a point where you get kind of a polymerization with color. So let it get up there, then cool it down from that point. I do a mixture of punch downs and pump overs. So predominantly punch downs going in to work the cap, to break it and turn it in there, be a little more delicate. I
Hmm.
do pump overs when needed to get some oxygen in if it's starting to get a little bit reductive, but I don't abuse pump overs on it. In that stage, we go in, and then the biggest choice that makes a difference, because I treat all the Cab Francs at that point the same, pretty much a
Hmm.
1 month maceration, delicate handling, trying to get the most out of it without beating it up. At that point, my favorite method, I would say, is going into predominantly neutral French oak puncheons. So puncheons are 500-liter French oak barrels. So normal barrels, 59 gallons or 225 to 228 liters. Those 500-liter barrels, what you get is a larger volume of wine per the surface area of oak.
Hmm.
So you get less oak influence. And it also kind of changes the structure and palate a lot. So for me, I'm a big texture person. That's really kind of what's gets me going with wines and kind of figuring out trying to carve through. So what you get with the puncheons versus, because I put the same wines, I'll put a couple of them in French oak barrels as well, so normal 225s. What you get with that puncheon is it's softer at first. It doesn't like slam onto your palate. It's very delicate at first. We almost second guess it, and then it builds on your palate at the mid palate. It kind of explodes and gets structure, and then it has this length that holds onto you. So it's unique to just, I mean, any variety I've put in puncheons. It's pretty consistent with that, and so it's got this grip that hangs on, and it just lasts, and it's there for 10 minutes after you drink the wine. It's holding on to you. Whereas if you put it into a 225-liter barrel, we're still talking neutral oak at this point,
Hmm.
you get a more immediate four palate structure and weight, kind of like it enters your mouth and expands right away. It's got this sweetness to it, and I'm not saying sweet, but it's got a noticeably more kind of softer, sweeter structure, and then kind of fills out through the mid palate, but then starts tapering off. So I like to do uh, a blend. It's between the two. So with the last Cab Francs I bottled from 2021, I did Cab Franc, Cab Franc Barrel Select, and Cab Franc Special Selection. It's just a very normal way of saying just different selections within that. One is 100% barrels, one's 100% puncheon, and one's a blend of the two.
Mm.
And so the blend, you get, all that structure and balance and everything pulled in, so it's as long of a experience you can get. But then when it's 100% punch, and you just get this really crazy length and more of a soft kind of tart fruit quality to it. It's more savory. And I mean, I could expand on that for like another 20 minutes. I'll pause there.
Yeah. No, I mean, the way you explain it, I mean, I'm gonna have to get some eventually. So
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to get
let's
some
send some out.
and try it. Yeah. All right. So we're getting to the end here. I've got one last thing that I think is an interesting question. I think it's interesting, so hopefully everyone else
Mhm.
will. Um, but as a winemaker, how competitive is the business amongst the other winemakers? Meaning, you obviously work as hard as you can to make the best wines you can. They're working as hard as they can to make the best wines they can. But is there a stiff competition between you guys, or maybe it's just like a friendly type of competition between just your fellow winemakers, whether it's in Virginia or wherever it is?
Yeah, I think it's you know um, as far as the industry goes and interacting with everyone, it's very friendly, and it's been my experience everywhere I've ever been all over the world. Because you don't have that many people you can commiserate with in this industry that kind of understand what you're going through,
Yeah.
especially when harvest hits and you're uh, 30 days deep into 15-hour days every day, and
Yeah.
so it's the only people you can bond with that. But I think winemakers are naturally competitive people,
Mhm.
and ego driven people for sure. That's definitely part of it.
Mhm.
um but not in a way that gets in the way of things. It's more of I'd say the competitive nature between winemakers is more of like tasting someone's wine, be like, I don't know why you did that.
Right.
That's kind of that. It's kind of just the like quiet internal competitiveness, but you would never put down another winemaker. You'd always help each other out. I don't know, anyone in the industry that puts theirs down that's not just, a jerk in their normal life.
Sure. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's definitely, as far as in the market too, I've never experienced it being cutthroat or anything like that. Like no one's gonna say, you know, say, I mean, even out, somewhere where wines are much more distributed, because I can't talk about being on the shelf here because none of us are on the shelf as much. But
Yeah.
if we were on the shelf with each other, uh, no one would be going like messing up your display or something, being like, oh yeah, screw them. It's everyone's happy to see each other on the shelf. It's
Yeah.
no one's trying to push someone else out of the way to get ahead.
Yeah.
So
It,
there's plenty
it's
of
not like
opportunity
that.
for everybody. No.
So when you taste wine now though, can you just have a glass of wine and enjoy it? Or no matter what, is it always it's almost like your job it's your job. So you find yourself trying to pick everything out of it and saying, and trying to maybe, okay, how did they do this or that? Is it ever just I just drink wine because I like it and I enjoy it? Or is it always there's always more to it because you're in the business?
Yeah, I'd say there's definitely the potential for there always to be more to it, but you just kind of have to choose to like I'm gonna tune out, and just enjoy this. Like I can
You can
allow
do that.
myself to sit there and pick it apart and do everything, or I can be
Yeah.
like I'm just gonna not listen to what I'm saying in my head. But I'll say when it's my wines, I can't do it. I'm just miserably picking everything apart the entire time. It's
Yeah.
it's totally brutal to enjoy your own wines. So,
Yeah.
but as far as a bottle off the shelf is much easier.
Okay. So the trick is if you're drinking your own wines, then of course you're going to be a lot more critical of
Hmm.
looking into everything. But if it's something that
Yeah.
someone else made, you can
Yeah.
enjoy it. So that's good.
Absolutely.
That's very interesting. So all right, well, Luke, it's been a long. I mean, I know it's late back there where you are. So
That's not too bad.
I know it's Friday night, so it's not too bad. But I appreciate so much coming on and educating us on what's going on out there in Virginia. And for those of you who didn't hear, I was talking to Luke about it prior to to starting. He said that they're finally got their shipping available, so people can actually
Hmm.
buy your. I mean, buy your wine and have it shipped out. I'm assuming not everywhere, but to a lot of places.
Yeah, yeah, we're finalizing, knocking the states out as the paperwork's going through. Some states are easier than others, so that's getting knocked out. And yeah, so definitely, and for anyone that's ever in Virginia, please come by. Of course, I'm proud of the wines and everything, but it's a pretty gorgeous tasting room as well, and definitely a spot to come by and see, and then travel through Virginia and taste other Virginia wines. It's Everyone needs to come back east at least for one weekend trip.
Yeah. Well, I would love to do that. It would be so cool. I mean, I've heard a lot of good things about wineries in Virginia. So absolutely my wife and I will definitely come out. And when we do, we'll come by and see you guys. I've seen the venue is looks beautiful online. I can only imagine it's 10 times better in person. So I mean, we'll definitely make it out there for you guys. So um
Awesome.
now, one thing, and I'm probably going to get killed for saying this, but doesn't Trump have a winery out there in Virginia?
He does. He
And
does. He's got a big winery.
and is it a popular place? I mean, despite what people think about him as a person or a president and all that, like, is it a successful winery? Like, do people enjoy the wines and all that stuff? I've always been kind of curious about it. So,
Yeah, it's so it was the winery and property was established by John Patricia Kluge. So it was all part of the Kluge estate, and it was kind of purpose built to be a sparkling production like traditional champagne method. And they produce some solid sparkling wines. I mean, a bottle of Trump sparkling Blanc de Blanc was a couple of years of age on it. I mean, it's solid wine. You can't dispute it. I mean, it's if you enjoy sparkling, you'll like that wine. So
mhm.
it's one of those things. It's definitely very charged. I mean, the funniest part, I'll say, I think anyone can appreciate the dynamic of it is Trump's winery, and then like right down the street is Dave Matthews Winery. So
Oh
those
my,
are the two neighbors.
wow,
So I
what a
find that
mix
kind of entertaining.
that
Yeah.
is. Oh
So
my gosh.
yeah. So
Interesting. Huh.
yeah,
So, but
especially
it's a good business, though. I mean, it's a
yeah,
successful winery out there.
definitely. I mean, they're a huge operation. And I mean, even before he ran for president, everything else, it was a very well operated winery. The
Yeah.
team over there is solid. I mean,
Yeah.
it's all awesome people, and yeah, so they've been running a strong business, and of course, it didn't hurt sales for them because
Sure.
now
Yeah.
anyone passing through the area,
They want to go
it's the
there.
fans going to go there, and
Yeah.
then they
Or they
go
don't
there,
want
and
to
then they
go
go
there.
to Dave Matthews Winery. It's perfect.
So no, I didn't even know about Dave Matthews. I'm a huge Dave Matthews fan. So,
Hmm.
well, so just really quickly, what is he making? And like, what do you think of his wines?
Yeah, it's Blenheim Vineyards, and so they're just down the road. Well, they're in the same neighborhood. We'll call it
Okay.
that. They're I'm trying to think what their production is up to. They produce a lot of solid wines. I mean, it's similar. It's a lot of the same stuff you're seeing in the Piedmont area. So a lot of your Bordeaux varietals. Um, I think Chardonnay, Petit Manseng, Viognier. They might do some Sauvignon Blanc as well.
Hmm.
Um, but all really solid stuff. I mean, just well made, awesome wines. Their winemaker over there, Kirsty Harmon, she's extremely nice and knows what she's doing. So definitely, I I think it's probably more of her winery than Dave's,
Yeah.
but
You ever
at
see him over
least
there? You ever go over there and see Dave walking around?
I have not.
Oh,
I
okay.
know people have seen Dave and hung out with
That
Dave. I mean,
that would
it's
be cool because he seems like a cool guy to hang out with. Like if you wanted to hang out with somebody.
well, it's really funny. The guy that linked me with this job that John Cures from Oxide Vineyards, who I was talking about.
Hmm.
He met with Dave at one point talking about grapes and everything and didn't know who he was. He was with,
Okay.
I think, the vineyard manager of that property, and they were out getting lunch at a just a restaurant in town, or maybe an evening. But they were like sitting out on the patio. There's just three of them talking, and he's just talking guy like whoever. He's talking
Right.
to Dave Matthews, not
Could have
knowing
been
who
anybody.
he is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's like, man. So they're talking to him, and all these people kept hanging around. He's like, man, what's going on? Will these people back off? And he didn't find out till after. Like he didn't know till after it all
Wow.
happened.
That's
He's like,
interesting.
"Oh man, that was Dave Matthews, huh?"
That's that's awesome. Well, Luke,
Yeah,
thank you so much. It's been terrific. I really appreciate it. I can't wait to get a hold of some of those wines that you guys are doing out there, and just try my first Virginia wines. But definitely, when my wife and I get out there, we're gonna come by and check out what you guys are doing. So
absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. This has been an
it,
absolute pleasure.
it's been
I
awesome.
appreciate that you wanted to learn about Virginia wine.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I loved it, and I had a great time. And I'm hoping that the listeners, picked up a few things and enjoyed it as much as I did. So,
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
all right, well,
And
take
thank
care,
you all very much for listening.
and good night, Luke. I know.